administrator, our administrative manager, and I'm going to introduce our speakers, but I'll also introduce Samuel Raphael Williams, who's our communications officer in Scottish CND, and myself. I'm Lynn Jimison, the current chair of Scottish CND. So welcome to this webinar. We have two excellent speakers, and we are a couple of days before the anniversary of the terrible accident at Chernobyl, which we're going to speak about. And our first speaker, Dr. Iain Fairlie, is an expert on the effects of radiation on the human body and is very well placed to speak about this. And our second speaker, Pete Roche, is a long-term keeper of knowledge about nuclear power, actually. He runs a website, No to Nuclear, and has gathered all kinds of information over the years and is a very well-informed person about the Scottish situation. And part of the reason for Scottish CND hosting this webinar is because of the very dense and long-standing interconnections between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. So we are a campaign for nuclear disarmament. Our primary aim is to rid Scotland of nuclear weapons, the UK of nuclear weapons, the world of nuclear weapons. But actually, we believe that nuclear power, and this is an evidence-based belief, nuclear power is part of what helps support the whole nuclear weapons industry. And from the very beginning, of course, the nuclear weapons industry was in the lead, and it was because of nuclear weapons that we, in a way, developed nuclear power, or at least, you know, they were hand in hand from the very beginning. And the very dirty process of mining uranium, which causes lots of harms, is an essential component of both industries. And the legacy of nuclear waste and nuclear contamination that can last many thousands of years is an aspect of both industries. But in the context of the United Kingdom, where we are a nuclear state, the nuclear weapons industry needs a nuclear power industry to keep alive a sufficient throughput of graduates, people interested in the topic area, doing research around it. And in the kind of wider context, much of the research and development that's going on into, say, fusion, for example, is also about nuclear weapons design. And one of the leading agencies in developing research around fusion, the National Ignition Service in the United States, is totally tied up with the development of nuclear weapons. So the two industries are very interconnected, always have been, and that's why it's very important to talk about them. But now, of course, nuclear power is also tied up with the claims about the need to shift to greener fuels. And I think you'll hear arguments from Pete about why you should be very skeptical about the idea that nuclear power is green, even if you set aside the uranium mining and the terrible legacy of waste. That's a very difficult argument to actually sustain factually. So without any more ado, I'm going to hand over now to our two speakers, and we're going to do them in the advertised running order. So Iain will speak first. He'll speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have some immediate questions, and then we'll have Pete. So thank you very much. Iain, over to you.
Great. Great. Now, can you see the screen? Yeah, you can see the screen, and you can hear me. Yeah.
Loud and clear, Iain.
Yeah, good. A couple of points first. You'll see that I've spelled Chernobyl as Chorn or Chornobyl. That's because that's the Ukrainian spelling, and the plant is actually in Ukraine. Chernobyl is the Russian spelling. So we want to support the Ukrainians, so we should really call this Chornobyl, okay? The second thing about names is that I'm Iain Fairlie. I want to emphasize that I'm actually Scottish. I was conceived, born, and brought up partly in Edinburgh and partly outside. Although the funny accent is due to the fact that I left Scotland when I was a kid. But nevertheless, I still regard Scotland as being my home in many ways. Right. We're on to slide 1, slide 2. These are some comments made by officialdom shortly after Chernobyl. And this is what the IAEA said in 1996. It's the foremost nuclear catastrophe in human history. And you can see the other quotations. Basically, Chernobyl was by far the worst nuclear accident. And we are here marking the fact of its 39th anniversary. This is the remains after the double explosions on on the morning of April the 26th, 1986. You can see there's an incredible hole where the reactor 4 used to be. And all this debris here in the turbine hall is due to the concrete flying up in the air and then falling back and knocking holes in the roof of the turbine hall. This is another picture of the immediate aftermath. You can see it was one heck of an explosion, or two explosions actually. A very, very serious accident. Now, what happened after the accident is that the graphite core caught fire and burned for 10 days. Now, where my cursor, I hope you can see my cursor, but where my cursor is pointing, that is where Chernobyl is. It's 2,500 kilometers away from Britain. And you can see on the first day, April the 27th, you got the cloud coming here. And then 3 days later, you got the cloud being across in Scandinavia. And then later, the debris falls over much of Europe. As you can see here, or Eastern Europe anyway. And then later, this is on May the 1st, the cloud reaches Britain and scatters across May the 1st, May the 2nd. Still spewing out radioactive debris here. Again, 3 days later, March the 4th, still spewing out debris from Chernobyl. Again here on March the 9th. So you can see that Europe was actually badly affected. Now, this is a map showing cesium deposition across the whole of Europe. This is the net result of the accident happening, and this is Chernobyl here, where I'm pointing, okay? You can see that Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine were the most affected, but the rest of Europe got it too, including the UK. And including, of course, Scotland. You may ask why the Balkan countries here are blacked out. The reason is that how they measured these was to send helicopters at about 100 meters above the ground with dosimeters pointing downwards. And when they asked the Balkan authorities if they could do that, the Balkan authorities refused because they thought that this is a Western subterfuge. So they said that the European Commission helicopters couldn't fly over their countries. And you may ask why Sicily wasn't measured. Well, the reason is because the mafia said that they would blow up, they would shoot at the the European Commission helicopters. But the rest of Europe was measured. Now, a funny story here is that when all this was happening, the French Interior Minister went on TV and assured the French population that there would be absolutely no contamination coming from Chernobyl into France. It would not cross the French border. He actually said that. And he paid for it because he was later accused by the government of lying, and he spent a week in jail for having made such stupid announcements. Okay, UK, and the next slide shows the UK where it was badly affected, mostly on the west coast and northern Wales and southwest coast of Scotland, but also the Lothians as well, I'm afraid. And let's have a look at Scotland in more detail. You can see the orangey bits are where the highest amounts of cesium was deposited, mostly by rain. Where it rained heavily, Scotland got it, okay? So anybody who says to you, oh, no, Scotland wasn't affected, well, this shows you it was affected, okay? Sad to say. Now, the increased ill health effects from Chernobyl altogether, as measured by a number of studies, including the ones that I've done, are thyroid cancers, leukemias, which are blood cancers, solid tumors, non-cancer effects, for example, cardiovascular effects, Down syndrome, and various other mental health or what we call psychosocial effects as well, although it's very difficult to measure those. But these are definite effects as a result of Chernobyl. In fact, my studies have shown that we estimate 60,000 future cancer deaths as a result of Chernobyl across Europe, which is 15 times what the IAEA estimated it to be. We also expect there to be an epidemic of thyroid cancer cases, about 18,000 or so. The net result was that Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia were very heavily contaminated, but about half of the fallout was deposited outside these countries. And in fact, about 40% of the land surface area of Europe was highly contaminated by cesium. 40% of Europe. That's terrible. Anyway, so what about Scotland? Well, one study found by accident a significant increase in Down syndrome infants in 1986 and 1987. In case people don't know what Down syndrome, Down syndrome used to be called many years ago Mongolism. We don't say that now, of course, but it's where the babies are badly affected, both physically and mentally. And it's due to the non-disjunction of the chromosome 21. Anyway, this is what the study found. This is Ramsey Ellis Zealy, 1991, Down syndrome in the Lothian region of Scotland. And this is a journal. And it said a temporal association between the cluster and the events at Chernobyl was demonstrated. And then it goes on to say, however, there is no biologically plausible explanation to link the two events. Now, let me tell you, that's not, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Previous. These two sentences were written by different people, okay? In my view, I spoke to one of the authors, Helen Zealy, here, about 20 years ago now, and to ask her about this, and because I didn't know what was going on. And I'm afraid she took a very defensive view and said there was absolutely no way that the increase could be due to Chernobyl. Well, I'm a radiobiologist, and I beg to differ with that. And indeed, I think that the first sentence was written by Colin Ramsay, and the second sentence was written by Helen Zaley, who had two different views on the matter. Anyway, this is the graph which comes from the study, okay? And as you can see here, these are the years. And then suddenly in 1987, the year after Chernobyl, when babies are born, boom, there's a big spike in the number of Down syndrome cases. Big spike. And before that, it was gently going down. Suddenly, big increase. Okay. And you really have to try and figure out what's happened. Now, the first thing I did was that, well, I thought, were there any other countries in which Down syndrome cases increased? Well, you bet. And here they all are. Sperling in South Germany, in Finland, Hungary, Sweden, West Berlin, and of course England as well. European-wide, there was a study by Millendal and Box, and they concluded that there was something to worry about. Well, there certainly was. So basically, Down syndrome cases did increase as a result of Chernobyl in Scotland. So here we are, 39 years later in 2025, and still the nuclear establishment, by which I mean IAEA, UNSCARE, and ICRP, they still refuse to acknowledge the true scale of health effects at Chernobyl. They refuse to carry out any epidemiology. They refuse to give help to Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, which is outrageous. So I'm going to leave you with some questions about nuclear power. Is it prudent for us to ignore that there could be more, possibly more accidents? For example, one's already occurred at Fukushima in 2011. Is nuclear power a sustainable development? Is it consistent with the precautionary principle? Is it ethical for us to pass radioactive waste on to future generations? Because that's what we're doing right now. Is it ethical to increase nuclear weapons proliferation? Because every time we build a nuclear power station, no matter where in the world, that means a danger to proliferation. Now, in my view, all the answers to these questions mean that we shouldn't be touching nuclear power where the bars fall. I'm going to show a slide here, which I've just prepared, and because I'm often asked this, is nuclear power low carbon? Is it really low carbon? Well, the proponents always say, yes, it's, in fact, they say oftentimes there's no carbon, which is ridiculous. So I prepared this slide which shows you grams of carbon dioxide generated per kilowatt hour of electricity, which is made, okay? This is across Europe and Canada and the United States. And you can see the various forms of energy generation: wind, concentrated solar, geothermal, solar PV, photovoltaic, tidal, wave, hydroelectric, and there's nuclear. And you can see low carbon? No, it's not. It's less carbon than coal, but so what? We're not, coal is it's out of the question. Now, what I've done is I've presented, this study comes from Mark Jacobson, and he presented a range of figures there, as you can see, because it depends on the particular type of wind, also where it's located. And there's quite a range. I've given you an average here to make it easier to grasp the fact that for wind, solar PV, tidal, and wave, that the figures are from 5 to about 60, roughly speaking. But nuclear is double that, more than double that on average. So it's not low carbon, okay? But just in case people say to you that nuclear is low carbon, don't be taken in by it. It's not. I'm going to end by what Santayana said in the 1950s. He said that governments unable to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. So here we are with the British government pushing nuclear power again, wanting to build more nuclear power stations, totally ignoring what happened at Chernobyl and at Fukushima. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll take your questions later. Okay. Shall I stop share? Yes, I'll stop share. There we go.
Thanks, Iain. Yeah, I think that
Oh,
there's Lynn had just timed out for a second, but are you back with?
right, thank you. Sorry, my internet's slightly unstable. But can you hear me still all right? Yes? Yeah, thank you very much, Iain. Thanks for that. Shall we leave all the questions to the end and just go straight on to Pete? Thank you very much. Pete, please, over to you.
Just share my slides. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Right. My name's Pete Roche. This is the website that I run, notonuclearpower.org.uk, but I'm also a policy advisor to the Scottish nuclear-free local authorities. And I've been campaigning against nuclear power now for 50 years. We're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Scottish campaign to resist the atomic menace, which I helped to set up. But today, the Scottish Secretary, Ian Murray, opened a new wind farm called Moray West off the coast of Moray. And that has a capacity of 882 megawatts, which they say is enough to power half of Scotland's households. I always think it's a bit naughty of them to talk about households like that. They should be saying what percentage of Scotland's required electricity it's providing. But whatever way you look at it, it's a hell of a lot of electricity. And it's about the same capacity as Torness, to be honest. Nearly the same. So that gives you an idea of how big it is. So there's really a large amount of renewable energy already available. In 2022, the Scottish Government reckoned it had generated 113% of Scotland's overall electricity consumption. So it'll be even more now. That was 3 years ago, and there's been quite a lot of renewables built since then. So the capacity of Scotland's renewable electricity in 2024 was 17.6 gigawatts, compared with Torness, which is 1.2 gigawatts. And by June last year, 2024, there were 830 potential new projects in the pipeline, totaling 51.3 gigawatts. 75 of those were already under construction, 32 wind and various battery projects as well, and 455 already have planning approval. They're just awaiting construction. And then there's 300 projects which have submitted planning applications. So you can see there's renewable energy coming out of our ears.
Pete, just let me interrupt just briefly. Just because there are some people listening who are not people that is now the only, I mean, maybe everybody knew that, but I'm just making sure, so apologies.
Yes, Torness is in East Lothian. It's the last remaining nuclear power station in Scotland, and it's the one that we were setting up Scram to try and stop them building it in 1975. So it's at the moment it's due to continue operating until 2030, despite the fact that the reactor core is beginning to show signs of cracking, which means that it's actually quite dangerous to operate it. Anyway, going back to renewables, we've got a problem because, of course, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, but sometimes we have too much renewable electricity. In fact, the UK as a whole is wasting 7 terawatt hours of electricity by turning off wind farms when there's too much electricity. And we have to pay for that. Electricity consumers pay for that. That would be enough electricity to power all of Scotland's homes, to give you an idea of the quantity, because I don't suppose many people know what a terawatt hour is. And in 2024, that added £1 billion to energy bills across the UK. It's called curtailment when they have to turn them off. So if we could do something with that electricity rather than turning off the wind farms, then we'd be easily able to do without nuclear power stations. The nuclear advocates' solution, they say, is to build nuclear power stations to provide what they call baseload power, which is actually an outdated concept, providing power 24/7. But they can't be turned off in the same way that you can turn off a wind turbine. So as Mike Grubb at Imperial College told the House of Commons Select Committee on Energy, if you're worried about how to provide power during winter periods, when there's a cold, dark, windless night, you don't want to build a spanking new plant designed to run 100% of the time. It'll simply lead to more overproduction and constraint payments. So what we need is flexibility. We need something to be able to provide electricity when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining. So that's why this motion that was put forward in the Scottish Parliament by Sarah Boyack on the 4th of March was particularly depressing. Luckily, it didn't get agreed. It included statements such as, we need nuclear energy, it's an essential part of the future energy mix. She welcomed the support of the UK government for the development of what's called small modular reactors. And she regretted that Scotland will miss out on these investments and job opportunities because of the Scottish government's opposition to new nuclear energy projects and its outdated ideological opposition to small modular reactors. Small modular reactors are basically the same as the large ones that we've got, large light water reactors. They're just smaller. And the Tories came out with their policy last week. Russell Findlay, not many people have heard of him yet, but he's the new leader of the Scottish Tory party. He wants to build 9 of these small modular reactors across Scotland. He didn't mention any particular sites, although he made it pretty clear that he would like to see some of them in the northeast of Scotland to try and replace jobs that are being lost in the oil and gas industry. What's wrong with nuclear power is it takes far too long to build. We actually started talking about building Hinkley Point C in 2012. So that's, what, 13 years, and it's still not built, and it probably won't be open until 2030 or 2031 at the earliest. It produces electricity that's far too expensive. It's inflexible when we need flexibility to balance renewables, and there isn't a solution to the nuclear waste problem. The Nuclear Decommissioning Authority are looking around for a site to build a deep geological disposal facility in Cumbria. They've got 2 potential areas in Cumbria and 1 in Lincolnshire, but it looks like they might well get thrown out of Lincolnshire after the local elections. And they're not doing too well in one of the sites in Cumbria either. And why would we risk another nuclear accident, even if the risk's quite small, when we don't need to risk it? And as Iain's pointed out already, there's always a possibility of nuclear weapons proliferation. If we build nuclear reactors, then the Saudis are going to want to build nuclear reactors, and that gives them the opportunity to build nuclear weapons at some point in the future if they decide to. But I think the biggest downside is what economists call the opportunity costs. That means that we could be spending the money on things that are far better, could save far more carbon much more quickly. Taxpayers have, believe it or not, they've already spent 6.4 billion on a proposed new nuclear power station called Sizewell C in Suffolk, and there hasn't even been a final investment decision made on that yet, although Keir Starmer says he's determined to go ahead with it. But if we were able to decide to give up on Sizewell C now and save the rest of the money that the government's got penciled in for that, we could double the 6.6 billion that's already allocated for energy efficiency and warm homes. And that means that by the time we come to the next election, we might actually see our bills reducing, which is what we've been promised by the Labour government. There's a growing body of evidence to show that it's perfectly feasible to reliably supply the energy, not just electricity, but energy that includes transport and heating, the energy required for a modern economy with 100% renewable energy. And at May the 6th, 2024, there was already 100 peer-reviewed published journal articles showing that, and there are plans for almost every country in the world to produce the energy they need from 100% renewables. This is the plan for the UK that was produced by the energy modelling academics at LUT University in Finland. And it concluded that 100% renewable energy for the UK is perfectly feasible. Not only is it feasible, but it would save well over £100 billion in achieving net zero by 2050 compared to the UK government's current strategy. So there's plenty of ways to balance the renewables, variable renewables. First of all, you start by reducing overall demand, and we need to do that anyway to tackle fuel poverty. And the electrification that the government is trying to get us all to do of heating and transport, that reduces the need for primary energy in the first place by about 30%. So that's a good start. And then you introduce flexibility, which means using the energy when the wind's blowing and demand's low, and not using it when demand is high and the wind isn't blowing. For instance, there's a company in Edinburgh called Flexitricity, which is called a demand aggregator. They've got various different companies, like an ice store company who are prepared to turn off their freezers for a couple of hours when they're asked to, in return for a financial reward. And then there's the Gateshouse combined heat and power system, which is able to ramp up their electricity production and store the heat that they produce when they're required to. So there's all sorts of different companies like that doing those things. And smart controls, which means we now have to, if you buy a heat pump now, you'll have to have a smart control so that you'll be able to, for instance, just heat up your hot water when there's plenty of electricity around and turn it off when there isn't. The other thing we can do is increase the number of grid connections so that Scotland's vast wind resources in particular can be transported to countries that, or places that need it. There's a new connector just gone in between Wales and Ireland, and there's talk about building another one. We've already got one from Scotland to Ireland. There's talk of building another one, but there's connections going from Peterhead, or they're under construction rather, going from Peterhead to the north of England, and another one from Torness to the north of England. And then, of course, the main idea would be to store energy, electricity, with all sorts of different techniques. There's various different kinds of batteries. Pumped hydro storage can store it too. There's a liquid air scheme going in around Hunterston, which can store electricity. There's a company in Edinburgh called Gravitricity, which can save energy by a gravity method. And then we can bring our car batteries into play as well, using vehicle to grid technology. This is a company that I visited. They're in Bathgate. They invited me to go and have a look at their factory in January, after I'd made some remarks about them on an interview I did about Torness. and they make vanadium flow batteries, which can last much longer than the current lithium-ion batteries, and there's no danger of them catching fire either. So these are the kind of thing that we should be supporting, Scottish-based companies that can help us balance the renewables. And finally, this is some of the things that you can get on my website. I produce a daily nuclear news, which you can sign up for, and that arrives every morning in your email box between about 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Or if that's too much information, you can get a weekly summary emailed on Friday afternoons. And I also generally put together a quarterly report for the Scottish Nuclear Free Local Authorities, and that's available as well. So thank you very much for listening.
Excellent, thank you. So lots of excellent input. And now it's time for people to chip in their questions from the floor. We've already had some quite helpful contributions in the chat. The Birds of a Feather publication, we've got the PDF of, if people wish to download that. But I don't think there's yet any questions in the chat. Am I right?
I put one in there, Lynn, just in case people are still typing up their questions for Pete.
Fine. Samuel, do you want to just ask your question then, please?
Yes, I will. It was for Pete, and I wanted to ask. You might have gone over this, and I might have missed it, but why exactly does this curtailment, this renewables curtailment, happen when it does happen? And I had a kind of subsequent question, which is it to do with limitations in the infrastructure for electricity storage? Because from what I gather, that would be one of the big what you call opportunity costs of building extremely expensive nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
Is building up this capacity. Have I kind of understood that correctly?
Yes, yes. The grid can't cope with too much electricity, basically. So if we've got too much electricity coming from wind at any one particular time, then some of the wind turbines have to get turned off. Maybe there's not enough demand. Perhaps it's a sunny and windy day. So there's all sorts of reasons why they might want to do it. But the trouble is, one of the problems at the moment is that there isn't the grid capacity, as you say, to send it all down to England. So they might actually be paying gas-fired power stations to turn on in England and paying wind turbines in Scotland to turn off, which is just completely balmy. So we need to sort that out as quickly as possible.
Okay, so there's a question from Linda Williams saying, I recently heard about a UK company who wants to put nuclear reactors on ships and barges. Any information on that insane plan? Well, of course, Linda, you probably, you'll know perfectly well that we already have nuclear-powered submarines, and that's what's carrying nuclear weapons. But anyway, this is, I think you're suggesting some sort of commercial idea of putting them on ships and barges. Pete, do you know anything about that?
There's quite a few companies around. I didn't know there was a British one, but there's a Danish company and a Korean company, and the Russians have already got ships with nuclear reactors on them. So it's definitely something we need to watch out for. I'm sure Greenpeace will be trying to ban it because they're quite involved with the International Maritime Organization, but it's an uphill struggle at the moment.
Yeah, and then Fiona McGregor quite reasonably says, how do we reconcile the obscenity of Scotland producing in excess of renewable energy while 40% of our people are living in fuel poverty? Can the excess energy not be made available to our own people first? Community battery storage, charge up all the electric buses and cars.
You would think so, wouldn't you? Unfortunately, that's not how capitalism works. I don't think. We can. They've got. It's perhaps a good idea to look at things that are going on in Orkney, where they've definitely got too much wind, and they're trying their hardest to do things like produce hydrogen to fuel the ferries, and also provide cheaper electricity to people that are in fuel poverty. Whether that can, well, hopefully at some point that will happen across the whole of the United Kingdom. And obviously people with storage radiators, of which there are quite a lot in Orkney, because I don't think they've ever had gas, they can power up their storage radiators when the wind is blowing and the demand is low, and then they'll be able to buy that electricity at a cheap price because nobody else wants it. So that's one kind of flexibility solution that hopefully can spread across the whole UK.
Do you want to say something, Pete, about the way the electricity's cost is pegged to gas and how we got into that insanity in the United Kingdom?
There was a very interesting interview with Ed Miliband on the Today programme this morning. And I don't think Justin Webb, who was doing the interviewing, quite got the point that Dale Vince was making. Dale Vince was making the point that you've just made, really, is that it's crazy that the cost of our electricity is always priced at the highest cost input. So you could have 99% of the UK's electricity coming from renewables and 1% coming from gas. And yet everything is priced at the price of gas. And Dale Vince just said, we should just stop doing that. Why are we doing that? Whereas when the interviewer, Justin Webb, got onto speaking to Ed Miliband was basically saying, that's why we need to stop using gas. He didn't address the question of why we actually have to price it in the way that we do. I'd be quite interested to know what Ed's answer would be if somebody asked him the right question.
Right. So there's a couple of new questions. Why the relentless push from the United Kingdom and some Scottish politicians for small modular reactors? Is it the industry lobbyists, or are there other players and factors? What do you reckon on that one?
The trade unions are another player.
Yes.
The ones that would be working in small modular reactors, or if you go to Sellafield or Dounreay or some of these places, they're desperate to get a small modular reactor. But the story is really that large reactors have been a complete failure. They produce electricity that's far too expensive. You may not notice it from places like Torness because the nuclear industry has been bailed out so many times by the British government. They sold British Energy to EDF for about the cost of one reactor, Sizewell B. So they've already had a big leg up. They're not putting enough money away to decommission the reactors either. So even if you know what the price of the nuclear electricity is, it's cheaper than it really should be. So they've come up with this idea of building smaller versions, which is counterintuitive, really, because the reason why reactors have been getting larger and larger is because of the economies of scale. When you build something larger, it should produce per kilowatt, it should be cheaper. So they're going backwards. And their theory is that because you build it in a factory, you build at least some of the parts in a factory, that's the modular bit, then that will reduce the costs. But you've got an enormous hill to climb with your modularity because nuclear is so expensive already. And the FT reported on a study last week which reckoned that small modular reactors will be the most expensive source of electricity, even more expensive than large nuclear reactors, more expensive than gas, and certainly more expensive than renewables.
So sort of slightly Alice through the looking glass. Right. So
yeah, it's just one study, but there's no reactors anywhere in the world yet for us to be able to say whether that's right or not.
And
Lynn, there was a question for Iain, slip from slightly earlier on. It's
all
from
right, please.
Dart.
Well, yes, please do it, Samuel, please.
It says, for Iain Fairlie, can you explain why nuclear power plants have such a large carbon footprint?
Well, yeah, this is the point. It's not just the reactor. These studies were life cycle analysis, the slide that I showed you, are a result of taking everything into account, from uranium mining at the beginning to the disposal of nuclear waste at the end. Now, it actually is true that the reactors themselves don't produce a whole lot of carbon dioxide. However, everything else does. Whether you're talking about uranium mining, uranium milling, refining it,
Tons of
um,
concrete.
making uranium UF6, enriching it, to then actually building the nuclear power stations themselves involves a huge amount of poured concrete, and which involves a lot of carbon dioxide. And then, of course, when you take the fuel out, you have to cool it for God knows how many years, and you have to dispose of it. And then you have to dispose of the reactors themselves. So taking everything into account, it's a huge generator of carbon dioxide from cradle to grave. And basically, most people just think about the reactor, which is not correct. Now, whilst I've got the floor, I'm wondering if I can make a plug for something. Chairman, can I do that? Just for,
Yes, please.
on July the 9th, that's Wednesday, July the 9th, a group called 100% Renewables and NFLA together are going to be holding a conference in Manchester. I know that's a long way from Scotland, but it's going to be online. So can I ask people to jot in their diary the fact that there is going to be an online conference on July the 9th. And the aim of this conference is to put across to Miliband the fact that what we've been saying here is that it's absolutely feasible, as Pete was saying, to supply all of our energy needs via the renewables without recourse to the fossil fuels or without recourse to nuclear. So there's going to be quite a few important speakers. So that's going to be in the town hall on July the 9th. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Dan, you also typed a further comment in your, I just wonder if you want to just speak, actually. Do you want to just speak to us?
Oh, I'm the secretary of the Nuclear Energy Information Service in Chicago. And we have a website with a lot of information on it. But as things have come up during this discussion, I feel very compelled to let you know of what I've been reading lately and what our group is doing. And I have been talking to Linda through the chat about our upcoming, well, it's not upcoming, it's next year, the International Uranium Film Festival, which I think everybody should become aware of and try to get into their cities. And speaking of plugs, tonight we're going to have a program with Jill Murphy Long, and it will be about 3 Mile Island and the results of 3 Mile Island, which have been completely subsumed in the United States.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
No, it's good to know about what you're doing. Thank you very much, Jan. And if you want to send us more information, we'll try and sort of send it around our members and everything. So thank you.
Well, I'm so happy to have come here. My ancestors are from Drumnatucket.
Thank you. Great. There's some more information also put in the chat. So there's Ian, no, sorry, Jan, you've also put in about the paper about small modular reactors. So thank you for that. Right, am I missing anything else in the chat? Anyone else want to come in? Sorry, Samuel, you trying to come in?
Well, just there is a question from Paul here, a Paul. It's directed towards Ian. And Paul says, it seems there is no consensus regarding a direct link between Chernobyl and a 1-year increase in children born with Down syndrome. I wonder if you can elaborate on the evidence to conclude on a link.
Well, yes, yes, I'm not muted. Basically, exposure to what happens is that pregnant women at the time of the Chernobyl accident would be living in the downwind of the plume, the radioactive plume that came out of Chernobyl, and they breathed in radioactive gases and radioactive particles, which affected their unborn fetuses and embryos, and when causing mutations. It's quite straightforward. It's well known that radiation causes mutations, birth defects, and that's exactly what happened. It's not this is not rocket science. It's well known that exposure to radiation and radioactivity causes birth defects, and Down syndrome is a birth defect. It's a very
Okay.
In the sense that the damage that needs to be done is quite easy to do, so to speak, non-disjunction of chromosome 21. So it's basically Down syndrome is a marker for exposure to radiation. It's well known. I don't know where Paul got his, there's no known link. Well, of course, there is a direct link. And I speak as a radiation biologist on that.
Okay, thank you. Can you were indicating that you want to speak. Do you want to either unmute yourself or put your thing in the chat? Do you want to unmute yourself? You can't unmute yourself.
Duncan's trying to speak.
Okay, do you want to type it in the chat then, Duncan? Yeah, okay. I don't think we can unmute you. I think you need to do it yourself as far as I understand it, but I might be wrong.
Okay,
Christina,
sorry.
do you
I just
know?
wonder if
Oh,
can
there
you
you
hear
go.
me?
Yeah.
I seem
Yes.
to be yes. Could I ask Iain Fairlie, do you know anything about health effects on the uranium miners, the workers in nuclear power stations, and workers at Sellafield? I mean, how widespread is this negative effect on health in the whole passage, and indeed on the submariners on the nuclear-powered submarines?
Well, very quickly answer that. There are more studies that you can shake a stick at showing the effects of radiation to workers. And in fact, workers, because there are so many workers, 300,000 over in Canada, United States, and Britain and France, that there's been studies done amongst those showing quite clearly that there are ill health effects, including cancer and leukemia. As regards uranium miners, ditto, the same thing. But there have been very few studies that I'm aware of, in fact, I don't know of any, about the effects of radiation on nuclear submariners. I would be surprised if there weren't any, but I'm not aware of any studies actually having been carried out.
Okay, thank you.
I asked that question because on Monday it's Workers' Memorial Day, and I'd just like to say to participants who might be attending the events that take place all over the UK anyway, and maybe internationally, that this is a good way in which to raise the nuclear issue among particularly trade unionists who attend these events every year on that date. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good idea. Thank you, Duncan. Right, so there's a couple of more contributions in the chat. Sorry, there's not apart from endorsements of films, is there a question here? And there's also, well, there's an interesting comment from Italy, from Del Patrista Strepetti. Apologies if I've just mangled your name, but about making international connections. And yes, we would be very interested in doing that. And maybe you could put your email in the chat and maybe we could follow up with you. That would be, or well, we must have your email already, I guess, from registering, but we should do some more connecting around how to campaign against modular nuclear reactors if you're also being threatened with them in Italy. And you're also endorsing the film Radioactive. And somebody else is telling us about another program, the hidden health fallout from nuclear power, and giving us a link. Thank you. Okay. Samuel, you had a couple of plugs that you wanted to make.
Just very quickly, we'll finish on time in just a minute or two. But I was asked by a convener of the cross-party group, Scottish Parliamentary Cross-Party Group, to advertise an open meeting on Thursday, the 15th of May. So that's in just a few weeks' time. Thursday, the 15th of May. It's taking place at 1 p.m. And it's the cross-party group for nuclear disarmament. They will be hosting Okope Ajonye, who is from the Nuclear Information Service and has recently produced a report and briefing on Fairlie and Coolport, and will be at the Scottish Parliament on Thursday, the 15th of May at 1 p.m. To give a presentation on this report. And if you would like to attend, you are welcome to contact Scottish Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. I'll put the email, the contacts in the chat here, and I will put you in touch with Janet Fenton, who coordinates the cross-party group, helps to coordinate the cross-party group at the Parliament. So that's Thursday, 15th of May at 1 p.m. Thank you.
Is that it for this plug, Samuel?
We are Scottish C&D is also, I mean, speaking about trade unions, we will be at this Scottish Trades Union Congress next week in Dundee. We have a stall there for the first 2 days, and on the Tuesday afternoon, we're also hosting a fringe event, which will be attended by a panel of trade union representatives, and the focus of that event will be this drive towards militarization, which we're seeing now, and how the trades union movement should respond. And further to that, so that's next week, Monday, Tuesday to Wednesday next week for those who are STUC attendees. And also 15th of May, 10th of May, Saturday, 10th of May, we are co-sponsoring a demonstration in the city centre of Glasgow with Stop the War. Again, on the theme of militarization and advocating welfare, not warfare, and a peace economy rather than one based on conflict and destruction. And if anyone has any questions about any of those events,
okay, great. Thank you.
I welcome your communication.
Thank you very much. We're slightly a couple of minutes over, but to come back in. Please just come in quickly.
Yeah. When Fukushima happened, there was a ship that was within 100 miles, and it was manned by pretty young naval personnel that was it was the USS Reagan. It was directed to go into Fukushima and help the people. It was called Operation Tomadichi. The people on that boat began complaining pretty fast that they had been badly affected in their health. And the Navy said, you're not any worse off than anybody else in the Navy. And they put out statistics about the health of the nuclear Navy. And it turns out that people who had been in the nuclear Navy had cancer 9 times the rate of the general population of the United States. And this is an article by Chris Busby. And, you know, I've got my email in there. If you want that article, please email me. I'll be happy to send it to you. It's very, very well supported.
Great. Thank you for that, Jan. That was definitely a gem worth knowing about. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, so we're now a little bit over the hour, just 3 minutes. So unless there's anybody who's been holding something that they really desperately feel they want to say or ask now, let me just double check. I'm just looking around and I'm not seeing anything. So I'm going to thank you all very much and to ask you to thank our speakers. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much. And we'll see some of you at our next event.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.